Rat pushed himself up. He took the flashlight, muttered something, and moved down to the far end of the hooch. For privacy, the men had rigged up curtained walls around their cots, small makeshift bedrooms, and in the dark Rat went quickly from room to room, using the flashlight to pluck out the faces. Eddie Diamond slept a hard, deep sleep. The others too. To be sure, though, Rat checked once more very carefully. Then he reported back to Fossey. All accounted for, no extras. Eddie, Darvin dreams. Rat switched off the flashlight and tried to think it out. Maybe she I don't know, maybe she camped out tonight, under the stars or something. You searched the compound? Sure I did. Well, come on, Rat said. One more time. Outside, a soft violet light was spreading out across the eastern hillsides. 2 or 3 ARVN soldiers had built their breakfast fires, but the place was mostly quiet and unmoving. They tried the helipad first, then the mess hall and supply hooches, then they walked the entire 600 meters of perimeter. Okay, Rat finally said, we've got a problem. When he first told the story, Rat stopped there and looked at Mitchell Sanders for a time. So what's your vote? Where was she? The Greenies, Sanders said. Yeah. Sanders smiled. No other option. The stuff about the special forces, how they used the place as a base of operations, how they glide in and out, all that had to be there for a reason. That's how stories work, man. Rat thought about it, then shrugged. All right, sure, the Greenies, but it's not what Fossey thought. She wasn't sleeping with any of them, at least not exactly. I mean, in a way, she was sleeping with all of them, more or less, except it wasn't sex or anything. They were just lying together, so to speak. Marianne and these 6 grungy, weirded out green berets. Lying down, Sanders said. You got it. Lying down how? Rat smiled. Ambush. All night long, men. Mary Ann's out on funkin' ambush. Just after sunrise, Rat said she came trooping in through the wire, tired-looking, but cheerful as she dropped her gear and gave Mark Fossey a brisk hug. The 6 green berets did not speak. One of them nodded at her, and the others gave Fossey a long stare, and then they filed off to their hooch at the edge of the compound. Please, she said, not a word. Fossey took a half-step forward and hesitated. It was as though he had trouble recognizing her. She wore a bush hat, a filthy green fatigues. She carried the standard M16 automatic assault rifle. Her face was black with charcoal. Mary Ann handed him the weapon. I'm exhausted, she said. We'll talk later. She glanced over at the Special Forces area, then turned and walked quickly across the compound toward her own bunker. Fossey stood still for a few seconds, a little dazed it seemed. After a moment, though, he set his jaw and whispered something, and went after her with a hard, fast stride. Not later, he yelled. Now. What happened between them, Rat said, nobody ever knew for sure, but in the mess hall that evening it was clear that an accommodation had been reached. Or more likely, he said, it was a case of settling down some new rules. Mary Ann's hair was freshly shampooed. She wore a white blouse and a navy blue skirt, a pair of plain black flats. Over dinner she kept her eyes down, picking at her food, subdued to the point of silence. Eddie Diamond and some of the others tried to nudge her into talking about the ambush. What was the feeling out there? What exactly did she see and hear? But the question seemed to give her trouble. Nervously she looked across the table at Fossey. She'd wait a moment as if to receive some sort of clearance, and she'd bow her head and mumble out a vague word or two. There were no real answers. Mark Fossey, too, had a little to say. Nobody's business, he told Rat that night. Then he offered a brief smile. One thing for sure, though, there won't be any more ambushes. No more late nights. You laid down the law? Compromise, Fossey said. I'll put it in this way. We're officially engaged. Rat nodded cautiously. Well, hey, she'll make a sweet bride, he said. Combat ready. Over the next several days there were a strange, tightly wound quality to the way they treated each other, a rigid correctness that was enforced by repetitive acts of willpower. To look at them from a distance, Rat said, you would think they were the happiest 2 people on the planet. They spent the long afternoon sunbathing together, stretched out side by side on top of their bunker, or playing backgammon in their shade of a giant palm tree, or just sitting quietly, a model of togetherness, it seemed, and yet at close range their faces showed the tension. 2 self-assured pose too polite, too thoughtful. Mark Fossey tried hard to keep up a self-assured pose, as if nothing had ever come between them, or ever could, but there was a fragility to it, something tentative and false. If Marianne happened to move a few steps away from him, even briefly, he'd tighten up and force himself not to watch her. But then a moment later he'd be watching. In the presence of others, at least, they kept on their masks. Over meals they talked about plans for a huge wedding in Cleveland Heights, a 2-day bash, lots of flowers, and yet even then their smiles seemed too intense. They were too quick with their banter. They held hands as if afraid to let go. It had to end, and eventually it did. Near the end of the 3rd week, Flossie began making arrangements to send her home. At first, Rat said Marianne seemed to accept it, but then, after a day or two, she fell into a restless gloom. Sitting off by herself at the edge of the perimeter, she would not speak. Shoulders hunched, her blue eyes opaque, she seemed to disappear inside herself. A couple of times, Flossie approached her and tried to talk it out, but Marianne just stared out at the dark green mountains to the west. The wilderness seemed to draw her in. A haunted look, Rat said. Partly terror, partly rapture. It was as if she had come up on the edge of something, as if she were caught in the no man's land between Cleveland Heights and deep jungle. 17 years old, just a child, blonde and innocent. But then weren't they all? The next morning she was gone. The 6 greenies were gone too. In a way, Rat said, poor Flossie expected it, or something like it, but that did not help much with the pain. The kid couldn't function. The grief took him by the throat and squeezed and would not let go. Lost, he kept whispering. It was nearly 3 weeks before she returned, but in a sense she never returned. Not entirely, not all of her. By chance Rat said she was awake to see it. A damp, misty night. He couldn't sleep, so he'd gone outside for a quick smoke. He was just standing there, he said, watching the moon, and then off to the west a column of silhouettes appeared as if by magic at the edge of the jungle. At first he didn't recognize her, a small soft shadow among 6 other shadows. There was no sound, no real substance, either. The 7 silhouettes seemed to float across the surface of the earth like spirits, vaporous and unreal. As he watched, Rat said it made him think of some weird opium dream. The silhouettes moved without moving. Silently, one by one, they came up the hill, passed through the wire, and drifted in a loose file across the compound. It was then Rat said that he picked out Marianne's face. Her eyes seemed to shine in the dark, not blue though, but bright glowing jungle green. She did not pause at Fossey's bunker. She cradled her weapon and moved swiftly to the special forces hooch and followed the others inside. Briefly a light came on and someone laughed, then the place went dark again. Whenever he told the story, Rat had a tendency to stop now and then, interrupting the flow, inserting little clarifications or bits of analysis and personal opinion. It was a bad habit, Mitchell Sanders said, because all that matters is the raw material, the stuff itself, and you can't chitter it up with your own half-baked commentary. That just breaks the spell. It destroys the magic. What you have to do, Sanders said, is trust your own story. Get the hell out of the way and let it tell itself. But Rat Kiley couldn't help it. He wanted to bracket the full range of meaning. I know it sounds far out, he'd tell us, but it's not like impossible or anything. We all heard plenty of wackier stories. Some guys come back from the bush, tell you he saw the Virgin Mary out there. She was standing a goddamn goose or something. Everybody buys it. Everybody smiles and asks how fast was they going. Did she have spurs on? Well, it's not like that. This Marianne wasn't no virgin, but at least she was real. I saw it. When she came in, though, the wire that night. I was right there. I saw those eyes of hers. I saw how she wasn't even the same person. No more. What's so impossible about that? She was a girl, that's all. I mean, if it was a guy, everybody'd say, hey, no big deal. He got caught up in the Nam shit. He got seduced by the greenies. See what I mean? You got these blinders on about women. How gentle and peaceful they are. All the crap about how if we had a pussy for president, there wouldn't be no more wars. Pure garbage. You got to get rid of that sexist attitude.